they told me I wasn't going to pass. They told me there was no way that you're going to make it, you're going to fail. You just need to prepare yourself for that reality that you're not going to make it. These were words, and similar words to that were spoken to me throughout my middle school and my high school career. One of the things I struggled with significantly throughout my entire teenage years was my academics. I was horrible at school. I mean, really, really bad. I wasn't a straight A student. I wasn't a straight B student. I wasn't even a straight C student. And if I'm being really honest with you guys, I wasn't even a straight D student. In fact, I remember many times praying to God that I would get at least a D on a test just so that it would be considered passing. And spoiler alert, God did not always give me my prayer request there. And unfortunately, I failed very frequently. It got so bad that when I was in 5th grade, I graduated from 5th grade. I don't know if you really graduate from 5th grade, but I completed 5th grade, and I started 6th grade. And I got halfway through my 6th grade year, and my parents and my school decided, you know what? 6th grade's not really working for little Arthur. Let's move him back to 5th grade. So after completing 5th grade and already doing a half a year of 6th grade, I went all the way back to 5th grade. And by the time I got to 7th grade, I had done a year and a half of 5th grade, and I had done a year and a half of 6th grade. Their hope was that by bringing me back a year, by holding me back, it would motivate me to do better at school. It would make things easier for me at school, and unfortunately, it did not. And then I got into high school, and things didn't change at all. In fact, when I got to my senior year of high school, the year that's supposed to be like, this is it, this is great, it's our senior year, we're finally getting out of here, I had principals and administrators and parents telling me, you're not going to graduate. Your grades are not good enough to graduate. And so a few months before I graduated, a few months before at least I was supposed to graduate, man, I started doing anything I could to just edge my grade up just enough so I could be handed that diploma, so I could walk down the aisle with my classmates, and so I could graduate from high school. And by some kind of miracle, by some kind of divine intervention, I was able to graduate. I just barely made it. And then it was time for college. And I don't know what I thought. I thought maybe, well, now that I'm in college, maybe I'm older, I'm more mature, I'm more developed in my ability to stay organized and to produce and all these things. And that was not the case. My academic performance throughout college was just as bad as my academic performance in middle school and in high school. In fact, in my junior year of college, my parents said, you know what, we're going to have to pull you out of college for at least a full semester. We want you to go to work, we want you to get a part-time job, and hopefully that will motivate you to come back in one semester, return to college, and get the grades that we know you can get. And so I was pulled out. And I got a part-time job. In fact, I worked at Weiss Markets in the deli aisle, and I ate a whole lot of deli meat that semester. In some ways, I actually liked working there because there was a lot of good food I had access to. But unfortunately, at the end of a semester, I went back to school with big hopes that, okay, finally, I'm going to be motivated. Finally, I'm going to get the grades that I need to get. And nothing changed. And then we got to my senior year. And my senior year of college was so much like my senior year of high school. And I had people telling me, you're not going to graduate. You're not going to get your degree. You've got to get your grades up. And I remember sitting in the offices of several of my professors, pleading with them, is there any grace you can show me on my grades? Are you able to boost up my grades just a little bit to help me? And I sought out extra credit. And I sought to try to make up assignments that I had been late on. And all of that did help to a degree, but at the end of the day, I wasn't able to get my GPA up high enough to graduate on time. I had to redo some of the classes that I had previously failed in order to help my GPA get to where it needed to get. Now, eventually, I did take those classes, I did graduate, and I did finish college. And I'm thankful for that. And I entered the workforce. And thankfully, for some reason, the workforce I found a little bit easier than school. In fact, I landed a couple of dream jobs that I really had wanted. And the thing about jobs, the thing about the workforce, the thing about having a career is if you're not motivated to work, if you're not producing and achieving the things that your employer wants you to produce or achieve, they don't just nicely give you a semester off and say, hey, why don't you take a nice semester off and come back when you're more motivated to work. They don't do it like that. It's not like school. In fact, if you don't produce and achieve at your job, often they're more than happy to give you a permanent, unpaid leave of absence. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to be fired from a job. So I knew I had to learn how to be organized. I had to learn how to produce the quality standards that my employers demanded. And over time, I was able to do that. In fact, not only was I able to do that, but I started getting almost good at it. In fact, productivity became a little bit of an interest to me. Like, I like this idea of what does it look like to efficiently and creatively and in all these other ways produce things that are creative, that are exactly what's being asked of you. And I started reading books, and I started going to conferences, and I started listening to audiobooks and podcasts, and I grew in my knowledge of organization and productivity and how to get things done. And I was able to use those skills to continue to do better and better at my places at work. And then something crazy happened, something I vowed would never, ever happen. I decided to enroll in a master's degree program. I had promised myself that under no circumstances would I ever go back to school. Middle school was horrible, high school was horrible, college was horrible. I would never go back to school, but something inside me said, you know what, you need to go back and get your master's degree. Now, I will admit, something inside of me also said, you're crazy, Arthur. Haven't you learned your lesson? What makes you think you can go back to school and have different results that you've had than you've had in the past? But I moved forward, and I enrolled in a master's degree program, and something cool happened. I started noticing my grades really weren't that bad. In fact, that's maybe an understatement. My grades were actually pretty good. I started applying the organizational methods that I had learned in the workforce to my schoolwork, and it was working. And I started using the personal productivity ideas and concepts that I had learned, and I would put them into my schoolwork, and so my grades were good. And after 3 years, I graduated with a master's degree with all A's and B's, and I was thrilled. I couldn't believe it. How in the world could someone who barely made it through middle school, barely made it through high school, barely made it through college, is now getting A's and B's in a master's level program? And it was because I started to focus and learn to produce things the way that they needed to be produced. And over time, as I realized I have now this kind of skill set almost in productivity, it became very selfish. In other words, it became very like, look what I can do now. Look what I have achieved. Or look how I can use my productivity principles toward making myself better, toward brightening my future, toward getting a better career. It was very self-centered, and it was very much about me. And one day, out of the blue, a verse came across my eyes as I was reading the Bible, a verse that I had read many times before, a verse that perhaps many of you have heard many times before. And it was this verse from Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord and not for human masters. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as unto the Lord and not for human masters. And I read that verse many times before, but for some reason on this day, it stuck. And I said, if with all this productivity that I've been engaged in and learning about and applying to my school and applying to my job, am I also running it through a Colossians 3:23 filter? Are the things that I'm doing, am I working at it with all my heart as unto the Lord, not as unto men? And I'm not sure that I could honestly say that I was. And so there are 3 points to this verse that I would love for us to just take just a brief moment to look at. Whatever you do, the first idea, whatever you do, whether you're in school, whether you have a job, whether you stay at home, whatever you do, everything that you do, anything that you do, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart. Think about that. The things that you do in life, again, at school, at work, at home, at church, with your friends, are you doing it with all of your heart? The second question, as you think about all the things that you do, are you doing it as working for the Lord? Do you ever think about that? As a student, sitting in class, in Spanish class, in biology class, in math class, in typing class, whatever class you have, are you taking those classes as unto the Lord? In your job, whether you have a part-time job or a full-time job, are you completing the tasks that you need to complete as working for the Lord? At home, with your relationships, at church, with your service, whatever it is you're doing, are you working for the Lord and not for human masters? You see, a lot of times we want the congratulations, we want the thanks, we want the praise, we want the honor from human beings to say, look what I did. Look at the cool thing that I did. Look at the amazing thing that I did. In fact, and I'm the first one to say that I have been guilty of that, and I still am guilty of that at times. But let's ask ourselves the question, whatever we do, are we doing it for human masters, or are we doing it as unto the Lord? And so that brings us to this idea of gospel-centered productivity. And before we move on from that, I want to just kind of define those 3 terms. In fact, the term gospel, if you kind of grew up in the church at all, if you kind of grew up in like the Christianese circle, or you went to Christian school, something like that, if you grew up in the Christian faith, gospel is probably not a new word for you. However, if you didn't grow up in that faith, this might be a word that is new to you. In fact, if I were to ask those of you who are familiar with the word to define the word, we would probably get some very different answers. And perhaps they would all be correct and all have similarities, but they would certainly be different. And so I want to define the gospel for our purposes today as this: the story of God restoring his creation back to himself. The gospel is the story of God restoring his creation back to himself. It starts in the book of Genesis. As mankind has sinned, has hurt their relationship with God, and has no way to repair that relationship with God with anything that they can do. And then that story continues throughout the Old Testament. It continues throughout the New Testament, and it continues even today. The gospel is the good news. The bad news is we've been separated from Jesus. We've been separated from God because of our sin. The good news is God loved us. God sent Jesus to die for us. Jesus rose from the grave. And if we put our faith and our trust in Jesus Christ, we have that relationship repaired. The relationship that was damaged with Adam and Eve thousands of years ago because of their sin is repaired because of the work that Jesus did on the cross. And so the gospel is that story, the story of God restoring his creation back to himself. And then we look at the word centered. As it relates to this, centered is focusing on God's story and the part that we play in it. Notice I didn't say our story. We tend to live in a little bit of a self-centered society, and we like to talk about ourselves, and we like to talk about our stories and my stories, and how do you play a part in my story? But what if we looked at God's story? What if we thought of it as God's story and the role that we play in it? The role that he has asked us to play in it. So we're talking about gospel-centered, and then this final word, productivity. Productivity is simply our work, our efforts, our contributions, our results, our achievements, what we produce, the things that we do at school, at work, at home, at church, in sports, in extracurriculars, whatever it is, that's what we produce, the things that we do, the things that we achieve. And so what does it look like to have gospel-centered productivity? What does it look like to consider our role in God's story as we seek to produce things that bring honor and glory to him? I would say there are 5 patterns that we can look at in each of our lives to kind of help us determine whether or not we're really living that lifestyle, that Colossians 3 lifestyle of gospel-centered productivity. The first one I would say is this: 5 ways to reset your patterns. The first one is this: reset your mind. We know from Scripture that we're told to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. The direction that our mind is set on is typically the direction that our body takes. And so God is saying, renew your mind. And how do we renew our mind? We spend time with God. We spend time in his word. We pray. We ask God to purify our hearts, to renew our minds, to allow us to come in line with his will, to let his thoughts be our thoughts. So what does it look like for each of us to renew our mind as part of resetting our patterns? The second one is this: evaluate your habits. We all have habits. Some of them are intentional. Some of them are unintentional. Some of them have been developing over a series of years, or some of them you may have just recently earned. And habits can be good and habits can be bad. But as you think about your own habits, which of those habits are drawing you closer to God, are drawing you closer to this idea of gospel-centered productivity, and which are taking you away? What are the healthy habits you need to keep? And what are the hurtful habits you need to eliminate? The healthy habits you need to keep, the hurtful habits you need to eliminate. The third one is this: evaluate your routines. We all have routines as well. Typically, our mornings look fairly similar. We get up, maybe we eat breakfast, hopefully we take a shower, we get ready for school, we get ready for work, get ready for church, whatever it is. A lot of times our days look pretty similar because we have routines. We have a routine that we do in the morning. We often have a routine that we do at night. And sometimes those are unintentional, or sometimes we put some intentionality and some thought into thinking through those routines. But how do you begin your day? How do you end your day? How do you run your routines? Evaluate your routines. We're going to talk more about that here in just a second. The next one is this: set goals. I don't know how many of you like to set goals. Some people, you may make those New Year's resolutions every January 1st, and by January 2nd, you've already broken them. All of us have done that. There's no judgment here. There's no shame here. But I'm not necessarily talking about New Year's resolutions. I'm talking about well thought out, well written out goals to help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. And we call those smarter goals. And if you have your if you have your notes out, this is a great acronym to think about how we set goals. SMARTER, SMARTER, stands for specific. Are your goals specific as opposed to just something general or so broad that you barely even know whether or not you achieve the goal? But are they specific so that when that goal has been accomplished, you know that you've accomplished it? Is it measurable in the sense that you, after you've achieved that goal, you can look back and say, yes, I achieved it because here's the measurements that say I achieved it. For example, if you're in sales and you say, this year I want to sell $50,000 worth of merchandise. That's measurable. At the end of the year, you will be able to look back and say, did I sell $50,000 worth of merchandise or did I not? $50,000, that's a measurable number. The goals that you create, what does it look like to make them measurable? The next one is this, action-oriented. Does it force you to do something? Is it a goal that is just going to kind of like you put it out there and it just kind of automatically happens and you don't really have to do anything? Or is it action-oriented, that when you set that goal, you say, all right, in order to achieve that goal, here are the things that I need to do. Maybe here are the habits that I need to create. Here are the things that I need to accomplish, these many things I need to accomplish in order to accomplish the greater goal. The next thing is this. Is it relevant? Your goals, are they relevant? Are they relevant to you, to your life? Or is it just something that you're not really interested in? It doesn't really relate to you too much. You kind of feel like maybe you should do it or someone wants you to do it. It's that kind of goal. But rather, what does it look like if your goals are truly relevant to you and to your stage of life? Whether you're in middle school, high school, whether you're an adult, whether you're living on your own, whether you're married, whether you're whatever stage of life you're in, what does it look like to have goals that are relevant to you and your stage of life? The next one is this, time-bound. Is there a set time? In the example, the sales example we used a minute ago, we said we want to sell $50,000 worth of product by the end of this year. By the end of this year, that's the time-bound portion of the goal. So that when you hit that certain time, that's the time you know that I should have already accomplished the goal by this date, by this day, by this time. Are your goals time-bound so that they don't just kind of last forever? Like, one day I hope I accomplish this goal, but it doesn't really matter when that happens. Make them time-bound. Are they exciting? You know what? We actually want goals that you set for yourselves to be exciting. We want you to enjoy them. We want you to feel motivated to do them. If they're not exciting, if they're boring, if they don't get your juices flowing, it's going to be so much more difficult for you to figure out how to accomplish that goal. We want your goals to be exciting. And then we want your goals to be risky. Not crazy risky, but a little risky. Because if your goals are easy, they're almost not goals. You're just going to kind of accomplish them anyway. They're so easy that they just kind of happen. You don't really have to do a lot of work. They just kind of naturally happen. But what if your goals are risky? What if you have to put a little work in? Maybe you have to put a lot of work in. And maybe, just maybe, there's a possibility that you don't even achieve that goal because it's risky. Don't be afraid to set goals that are a little on the risky side. And then the last one I say is this: create accountability. As you're thinking about resetting your current patterns, as you're thinking about setting up a life that is focused on the gospel, create accountability. Who can hold you to these new patterns? Is it a parent? Is it a friend? Is it a coworker? Is it a classmate? Is it a teacher? Is it a youth pastor? Is it a pastor? Is it a life group leader? Who do you have in your life that can help you be accountable to the goals and the patterns that you're looking to reset? Perhaps it's your wife. Perhaps it's a family member. Perhaps it's a mentor. Who is that person in your life? So that's 5 ways to reset your patterns, reset your mind, evaluate your habits, evaluate your routines, set smarter goals, and create accountability. So with our remaining time, I just want to kind of unpack one of those 5 just for a few minutes to give you an idea of what I do, and this is something that may help many of you in the same way that has helped me. So, evaluate your routines. As I said earlier, we all have routines. Sometimes they just happen, or sometimes, and maybe this is the way it should normally be, but sometimes we're very, very intentional and strategic about creating those routines. So the first one I would say this is create a morning routine. Create a morning routine. What does that look like? Well, you know what? We have things that we have to do in the morning, like every single one of us this morning woke up as part of our morning routine. If you didn't wake up this morning, you wouldn't be sitting here listening to me talk. So waking up is certainly part of your morning routine. But what are some of the other things that you have to do in the morning? What are some of the other things that you could do in the morning that would launch you in a great direction for the rest of the day? What are those things that would help you first thing in the morning to begin achieving the goals that you set out for yourself? Things like shower and hygiene, again, probably a good thing to do. Exercise, workout. I wish there was a little more exercise and workout in my daily routines. Some of you if you're in school, you like to do homework and studying in the morning. Maybe you have pets that you have to feed or walk. Some of you like to journal. Some of you like to read. Social media, check the news, whatever the case may be. Some of you like to do affirmations and meditations, and those are great. Those are great ways to start the morning. Maybe you should clean your room, do some chores, plan your day out. What are you going to be doing today? What are the important things that you need to accomplish today? And then quiet time. And I want to pause on quiet time just for a second, because to those of us who have put our faith and trust in Jesus Christ, we want to build that relationship with Jesus. And one of the best ways that I know to do that is to spend time with Jesus. In the same way that I built a relationship with my wife before she was my wife was to spend time with her, that's the same way that we grow closer to Jesus, by spending time with him. So this is not a legalistic thing of if you're a good Christian, you have to read the Bible, you have to pray, you have to do A, B, and C every day, or you're not a good Christian. We're not saying that. We're not being legalistic or judgmental about it, but we are saying if you're a follower of Jesus and you want to grow in your relationship with Jesus, spending time with him on a daily basis is key. Spending time talking to him through prayer, through worship, through reading his word, through meditation. These are all things that draw you closer to God, draw you closer to Jesus. Do you have a routine, a daily routine, whether it's a morning routine or a nightly routine of spending time with Jesus? If you don't, seriously consider making that part of your daily routine. The next thing as we think about evaluating our routines is to create an evening routine. And your evening routine is probably going to be a little shorter than your morning routine, but what does it look like to be intentional about the things that you do every single night before you go to bed? For me, one of the best things that I do that kind of launches me in a good direction for the following morning is every single night I pick out and lay out my clothes for the following day. Because what I know about myself, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, is when I get up in the morning, and I get up every morning at 5:30, I am in no mental space to be able to pick out my clothes. I can barely just stumble out of the bed. So what I find is I can lay out those clothes, I can pick those clothes every night, so that morning Arthur doesn't even have to worry about that. So that morning Arthur can stumble out of bed, turn off the alarm, and basically fall into the shower without having to think about it. So there's other things that you may want to add into your evening routine, whether that's family time, whether that's reading or listening to music or podcasts. Maybe there's homework or studying, or maybe there's some things that you can do to even accomplish those goals that you have set out for yourself. So what does it look like for you to create an evening routine that you do basically every single night. Okay, so we talked about morning routine, we talked about evening routine, and then what does it look like to create a weekly routine? So you have some things on your weekly schedule that you basically have to do. If you're in middle school or high school, you have to go to school every day, or at least every weekday, from time A to time B, whatever that is. That's part of your weekly routine. If you have a job, a part-time or full-time job, you have a routine of needing to be there at certain times throughout the week. There are certain things in your weekly routine that you don't necessarily have a ton of control over, but they are part of your weekly routine. It's the things that you do have control over, the things where you have some flexibility of time that can allow us to ask the questions, what can I do to make the best use of that time? What can I do to be strategic or intentional? Or what can I do to make sure that I'm accomplishing the goals that I set out for myself? And so a weekly routine might include school or work. It might include church or youth group or practice, extracurricular activities, family time. That's important. I don't think we have enough family times in a lot of our families in this country. Obviously, time for sleep, personal time, time to kind of rejuvenate from the day. Morning and evening routines, that's what we just talked about. Hobbies, time with friends, workout, exercise, and times where you're intentionally and strategically doing things that take you to the next level, that help you achieve the goals that you've set out to do. And I take all of this, I take this morning routine, I take this evening routine, I take this weekly routine, and I put that in the form of a calendar. And I'll show you that here in just a second. But as we think about this whole concept of evaluating our routines, morning, evening, and weekly routines, what does it look like to create those as unto the Lord? What does it look like to filter those routines through the Colossians 3:23 verse that we looked at the beginning, that everything we do, everything that we do, all the things that we do, anything that we do, we filter through this idea that we do it as to the Lord and not for human masters. We do it with all of our heart as unto the Lord and not for humans. What does it look like to create these routines, to point in a direction that says what I produce, what I achieve, what I do is going to be pointed at bringing honor and glory to God? And so I told you a minute ago that I put these routines on a calendar of mine, and I know many of you won't be able to see this because it is quite small, but you'll get a general idea of this is what a kind of ideal week looks like for me. And I plug in the things that I know I have to do every week and when I have to do them. I have a morning routine every morning, or at least every weekday morning, that begins at 5:30 a.m. and ends at 7 o'clock a.m. when I head off to work. And then I put my time in where I know I'm going to be at work at these specific times. I'm going to take lunch at these specific times. I have some regular weekly appointments and meetings that appear every single week. I plug them in. I know they're going to happen. I have my evening routines in here. I also have a weekly date night with my wife. And if you're married, a weekly date night is a great thing. We really look forward to that every single week. So I create this, and I do my best to say the things that I'm putting on here, the things that I'm spending my time doing, are they helping me achieve my goals? And are they pointing me in a direction of bringing honor and glory to God? And if they are, then I say, yes, this is a good, ideal week. And if there are things that tend to be pulling me away from the Lord, or things that are taking up so much time, they don't allow me to work on my goals, then those are things that probably should be cut from my life. And so it all comes down to where we started, Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Everything that you do, do it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. What would it look like for each of us to intentionally and strategically create a life that was all about working as unto the Lord? Those of you that are students, those of you that are in the workplace, those of you that are stay at home, What does it look like to create your routines, to reset your patterns, to renew your mind in a way that points us toward the gospel? And that is gospel-centered productivity. Guys, thank you very much. I'll be around for the next few minutes if anyone wants to talk. And then after that, feel free to connect with me online and we can keep the conversation going. Thank you so much.